Imagine a night in the Ice Age. Snow lashes across the frozen landscape. A campfire flickers in the darkness. And beyond its warm circle of light, a pair of golden eyes watches silently. A wolf. One of the most feared predators of prehistoric times. Yet tens of thousands of years later, its descendants sleep on our beds, wag their tails when we return, and panic when we leave the room. So what happened? No ancient human sat down and decided to turn a wolf into a dog? Perhaps the strangest truth is this: the wolves came to us first, and that accidental encounter would change both species forever. Go back roughly 15,000 to 40,000 years. The Ice Age is reaching its brutal final chapter. Humans and wolves are competing for the same prey, moving through the same frozen landscapes, and sometimes fighting for survival. But around human camps, something unexpected is happening. Hunters leave behind bones, scraps of meat, organs, and other remains. To a hungry wolf, the edge of a human camp is almost like a free restaurant. But approaching too closely is dangerous. The most aggressive wolves are driven away or killed. The most fearful never come close enough to benefit. Yet a small group occupies the middle ground, wolves that are slightly calmer, less anxious, and willing to approach humans from a safer distance. These wolves gain access to food that their rivals cannot. They survive. They reproduce. And generation after generation, their descendants inherit a little more tolerance toward us. No one planned this transformation. There was no ancient breeder selecting the perfect dog. Instead, natural selection may have been quietly doing the work, one cautious step toward the fire at a time. But there is another piece of the puzzle. What if human camps did not simply provide scraps? What if they offered wolves something humans themselves could not easily use? During the harshest Ice Age winters, hunted animals could become extremely lean. Humans needed fat and other energy-rich foods to survive, leaving behind enormous amounts of lean protein. For humans, too much protein could become a serious problem. But wolves were far better adapted to surviving on meat, and suddenly, the relationship made sense. A prehistoric hunter could throw unwanted lean meat toward a hungry wolf instead of wasting it. The wolf gained a reliable source of food. The human gained a scavenger that remained nearby without competing directly for the most valuable resources. Over time, the wolves that could tolerate human presence had an advantage. And here is where the story becomes fascinating. This may not have begun as friendship at all. It may have begun with hunger. One species had food it could spare. The other had the ability to eat it. A simple exchange of leftovers may have created the foundation for one of the most extraordinary partnerships in evolutionary history, the relationship between humans and dogs. But could simply selecting the friendliest animals actually transform a wild species? In 1959, Soviet geneticist Dmitry Belyaev decided to find out. He began selecting silver foxes based on just one trait: how calmly they reacted to humans. He did not teach them tricks. He did not train them to behave like pets. He simply allowed the least aggressive foxes to reproduce. And then something astonishing happened. After only a few generations, some foxes began approaching people voluntarily. They wagged their tails. Their ears became more floppy. Their coats developed unusual white patches. Some even made sounds resembling the whines of young dogs. Scientists call this pattern the domestication syndrome. One behavioral change appeared to trigger a surprising collection of physical changes. And this raises a fascinating question for you. If you had been living during the Ice Age, would you have trusted the first friendly wolf approaching your camp, or driven it away? Because that tiny decision may have been the beginning of the dog. The fox experiment revealed something even deeper. Domestication was not simply changing how animals behaved. It could reshape their biology. As wolves gradually became more comfortable around humans, natural and artificial selection may have favored changes in the systems controlling fear, stress, and social behavior. Researchers have found intriguing genetic similarities between dogs and humans with Williams-Beuren syndrome, a condition associated with unusually strong social behavior. In dogs, variations in related genomic regions are associated with their remarkable desire to interact with people. And then there is the tail. That familiar wag may look simple, but it represents something extraordinary. communication between two species. Over thousands of years, wolves that were less fearful could remain closer to human settlements, gain access to food, and reproduce more successfully. Their descendants became increasingly comfortable reading our movements, responding to our voices, and seeking our attention. Think about that for a moment. The dog looking back at you today is not simply a tamed predator. It is the product of countless generations in which survival increasingly favored an animal willing to understand us. Then humanity changed. The Ice Age ended. People began settling down, growing crops, and building the first agricultural communities. Meat was no longer the only major source of food. Wheat, barley, rice, and other starch-rich plants became increasingly important, and the animals living beside us had to adapt. For early dogs, human settlements offered a completely different menu. Instead of relying mainly on hunted meat, they could consume porridge, grains, scraps, and other starchy foods discarded by people. Their biology began to reflect that new relationship. Modern dogs generally carry more copies of the AMY2B gene, which helps produce amylase, an enzyme involved in digesting starch. Wolves typically have far fewer copies. In other words, as humans transformed their own diet, they were also transforming the evolutionary environment surrounding their closest animal companion. But this is where the story becomes even more remarkable. The relationship was no longer simply about wolves following humans for scraps. Their bodies were beginning to evolve around our civilization. Think about that. Every meal you share with your dog today echoes an ancient partnership that began beside prehistoric fires. But food alone cannot explain why this relationship became something deeper. When humans and dogs look into each other's eyes, both can experience increased oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding and attachment. It is the same biological system involved in some of the strongest social relationships in our lives, and archaeology offers an astonishing glimpse into just how ancient that bond may be. At Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, archaeologists discovered a roughly 14,000-year-old burial containing 2 humans and a young dog. Evidence suggests the dog had suffered from a serious illness and survived for weeks after becoming sick. That means someone likely kept caring for it when survival alone would not have been enough. Now pause and think about that. A prehistoric human spent time, food, and effort caring for an animal that could no longer provide an obvious practical benefit. Perhaps this is the moment the story changes. The wolf may have first approached our ancestors because of hunger, but thousands of years later, the dog remained beside us for something far more powerful. Not survival alone, attachment. And that ancient bond still lives beside us today. Today, your dog may sleep on a sofa, wait beside the kitchen, or follow you from room to room. Yet beneath that familiar behavior is an evolutionary story stretching back thousands of years. The animal beside you still carries traces of its ancient wolf ancestry. But its survival became intertwined with ours. We gave dogs food and shelter. They gave us companionship, protection, and eventually an extraordinary ability to understand human behavior. So the next time your dog looks into your eyes, remember, that moment is not merely cute. It is the echo of an ancient partnership that began around prehistoric fires. Do you think humans truly domesticated dogs, or did dogs slowly domesticate us too?